I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the New York Winemaker Special series. Across these 8 episodes, recorded in December 2022, we'll be exploring the New York wine scene in the company of 8 different winemakers, covering the Finger Lakes in the first 6 episodes of the series, and Long Island in the last 2. We continue the series in the company of Julia Hoyle of Hosmer Estate Winery. We hear her origin story and learn the influence of international travel on her palate and winemaking approach. We hear the changes that have occurred at Hosmer during the last 5 years. She talks the collaborative winemaking community in the Finger Lakes, Hosmer's location and vineyards, decisions in the cellar, and talks about the impact of Hosmer Wines in the UK. Enjoy!
I had no intention, like a lot of people, of becoming a winemaker when I was 18, 19. But I came to the Finger Lakes to study for undergraduate from Philadelphia. And so I did my 4-year degree. But during that same time, I was working at a cellar door, Fox Run Vineyards on Seneca Lake. And I had their 2005 Reserve Cab Franc. And I was like, what is this? This is so good. And that sort of led me to pepper the winemaker at the time, Peter Bell, with questions about just wine production in general. And I finished my undergraduate degree in 2011. And from
was
there,
it winemaking or something to do with winemaking, the degree?
Not at all. No, French and Francophone studies and women's studies, or gender studies. So nothing to do with wine. So yeah, I finished up my undergraduate degree and sort of kept bugging Peter at Fox Run. And then I also had an opportunity, nothing to do with wine, to work at the international school in Dakar, Senegal. And Peter's advice to me was, go. I will be here when you get back. You're not going to be 21 and ready to just move across the globe in a few years. So I went, I took that job. I then came back to do some cellar work, got another easy job through the French government teaching English for K through 5, then moved back full-time to the Finger Lakes to do cellar work. But also good advice from an early mentor. Go, do it now. You won't do it later.
That's it. And that was in 2017 or it was actually a little bit before you?
Oh, that was 2011, 2012.
Uh-huh.
So then when I kind of came back full time, started at Fox Run, and then shortly thereafter worked at another local winery for a harvest, Atwater Vineyards. And then from there became the assistant winemaker at Sheldrake Point. December 2013, by 2014, it was sort of, yes, I was at Sheldrake. I took a sabbatical while I was at Sheldrake to run the white wine cellar at night at Yalumba Winery in the Barossa Valley. So, nice. I went from 250 tons to 10,000, which was awesome to see. And shortly after that, we're almost at 2017. So shortly after that, I started as the head winemaker at Hosmer.
As I've just mentioned to you before we started recording, I've literally just interviewed Ben Riccardi at Osmote, and hearing his experiences and traveling in Chile and New Zealand and California. I think it's always one of the cool things to me. When I hear of a winemaker who has done that, has actually gotten out there, has kind of seen other ways of doing things. And I think that the question I might ask around that, and I think we want to keep this, of course, focused on the Finger Lakes, but maybe just to kind of bring in some of those mentors or kind of formative experiences that you had in the Barossa Valley or in other vineyards or other parts of the world that maybe stuck with you and you still sort of refer back to today.
So I would say going way back to before I was really full-time in wine production, one thing that does still stick with me, right, when we talk about tasting notes and flavor profiles, some of my tasting notes, I will talk about, like West African fruits, especially in Riesling, like mad is like this tart, really delicious, but like very tart fruit that you put sugar on to eat. So certainly I would say as a winemaker early on, I mean, I will eat anything. I will try anything. I certainly have many more places to travel to. But the more flavors that you experience, I think, right, your palate is better informed by what you're doing. So that was sort of an experience that, I lived there for a total of almost a year and a half. And I just, I don't know, that has formed my palate. But then moving into wine production, the Barossa, you get to a winery like Yalumba, they're really big, but they also know how to do what they do really well. And seeing how top tier fruit is handled down through large volume wines like their Y series, that's formative in all right, even here on a small scale, when it's a really busy day, what decisions should take priority? How can I handle this fruit in a quick way if it needs to be handled quickly? Or they would cold soak a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. And that's something when I started at Hosmer, I was working with Sauvignon Blanc in the Finger Lakes for the first time. And I said, no, we're going to crush it. We're going to soak it. I want all the flavor I can get. And I still do that. And I'm really glad I do that. And that's something that I also took away from working at Yalumba.
I think it's so cool that, you can go to, what is obviously a much larger scale winery at Yalumba, but there's still, it sounds as though there's still kind of quite a strong educational element of what you're doing. It's not just put this over there or, shovel this over there. It's like, okay, actually explaining and unpacking the reasons why so that you can learn, and again, that you can translate that learning into a different context.
Yeah, especially that particular position, the night shift winemakers. There's one for the red cellar and one for the white cellar. That were sort of held in place for someone early in their career, maybe just out of a degree program, or in my instance, and many other people like me, have a few years of experience, not quite a head winemaker somewhere yet, but looking for a little more than just sort of standard push the button, turn on the pump. Yeah.
I love it. And it's I love how this is the flow of this, because you've essentially taken us up in your story to 2017 and the sort of, I guess the getting the keys to Hosmer, or at least getting to the door of Hosmer. And I just wonder if we wouldn't just maybe talk a bit about the people there, because I think that's always for me the most interesting place to start. So maybe talk about some of the people that you met when you joined there in 2017, and maybe how some of those roles and people might have changed over that time.
Yeah, so I should start with why I was intrigued by the job at Hosmer. So when the job came up, I kind of poked around and asked a few people that have been in the industry around here for a while. And one of them, Bob Medill, said, the Hosmer family, they grow grapefruit. What you do with that in the cellar, that's on you, but they grow really, really grapefruit. So that's where the Hosmer family starts. They started their vineyard in 1972, Cameron and Maren Hosmer. They were out there with some of their friends drinking eggnog in December, doing the original pruning way back in the day. And, it was small back then and slowly grew over time. And then in the 80s, they have 2 kids. And around the time that Tim was born, they started the winery in 1985. So Tim Hosmer, he has a sister, Anna, who works for the U.S. ski team. So nothing to do with wine. Tim is fully taking over sort of the vineyard, the winery, not production, but sort of overarching concept from his parents, which is really great because Tim's 2 years older than I am. We're both in our 30s. So there's a lot of young energy.
Yeah, right.
So Tim and I jive really well. Recently, his longtime partner, Brooke, she's come in. She has a background, more sort of numbers background, which is really important in a business. She's taking over from Maren Hosmer, sort of as GM, and she gets to deal with all the nitty gritty. I go, I bought 10 pallets of glass. Sorry, it's coming. And she figures out how to pay for it, that sort of stuff. So she's also, young. My assistant winemaker, Emily, in her 20s, and the 2 guys full-time in our vineyard, Matt and Joe, also both late 20s and mid 30s. So we have a really young crew. We're all really excited about what we're doing. all of us, I would say, both in the vineyard and the winery, we all have our processes that we like, but we're not afraid to try new things either. And we have the energy to do that. So we have a really great team.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I think, having interviewed so many winemakers from across the world, really, and different ages and different kind of stages, I'm immediately being taken back to an episode I recorded over in Austria where I spoke to kind of three, I guess, newly minted winemakers, or three young ladies who were taking over the winemaker role from their parents, and sort of some of the transition in that. And there were, in their cases, there were sort of lots of new ideas and maybe different directions that needed to kind of coexist for a while. You don't want to kind of change everything immediately and kind of scare away all of the people who have helped you and have supported you kind of over the years. And but I just wonder, it sounds as though, as you say, with new energy kind of comes new ideas, and I'm just curious if maybe are there any things that kind of stand out over that time around change, really, and things that new energy has brought about you doing differently in Hosmer now, or any point that maybe wasn't being done in 2017.
Yep. On the vineyard end of things, which that's Tim's ship. He runs that at this point. But on the vineyard end of things, certainly figuring out what is sustainable in the Finger Lakes. What does sustainability look like? So we're part of that pilot team with the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. And so Tim's really been spearheading that. I mean, he went to the University of Vermont for environmental studies, really a focus on farming. How do you take care of the land that you're farming if you want it to be viable 50, 100, 150 years from now? So he's really taking on that. And there's all these background pieces. Usually that means a little bit more manual labor. Not, we do run pretty heavy with equipment, sort of like standard farm. There's only so much labor out there. That's a stressor that we're all dealing with if you're in any sort of farming right now. So certainly we have our tractors, we have those tools. But if you're going to spray less, there are other processes that you're going to have to then try and dial in the vineyard. So Tim's working on that. And then the winery, in some ways the infrastructure I have is incredibly efficient. And in some ways it's very old school. So this time of year, I have 3 ferments left. They're about to be done in the next week or so, I expect. As soon as they're done, we're going to open up our barn doors, let Mother Nature cold stabilize our wines. Things will partially freeze. And, the real process of bottling will kick off again in the spring. So, we have these older processes, but then I'm also always down to try a new strain or try, we have our skin ferments, which usually get blended away, or different barrel ferments that I usually blend away as components in wines, but I'm always tinkering just to see what happens, because you don't know till you try.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And that also it nicely loops back to your attitude around different foods as well. And, always wanting to try that. And it was a point I kind of didn't make earlier, but, I think that's also something that I've heard a lot of people talking about, actually opening up wines to different communities and to people from different parts of the world is like, okay, if you're using different fruits from the Caribbean or from Africa or from, I don't know, somewhere off in the depths of Scandinavia or something, that might well mean a lot more to them than always talking about lemon or always talking about yeasty notes, and I love that why not bring those things in? And if you use a fruit term that someone doesn't know, then they can Google it or they can try and track it down. It's
our cellar door staff definitely Googles some of my tasting notes, but that's fine. It's good for them. That's what I tell them.
That's it. And I think this is really interesting for me because this this whole sort of theme really that I'm getting, just that kind of open-mindedness and experimentation. When we were doing the preparation for today, you mentioned that specifically about the broader Finger Lakes community, and mentioning rising tide lifts all boats, and that kind of sense of collaboration and sharing wines. And that's one of the things that I love about wine regions and visiting wine regions, because I always kind of pick up on that. But as a bit of an outsider, it's something that I don't always get to see. So I wonder if you could maybe open a little bit the barn door onto that side of things. How does that look? Is it all sort of pretty informal and spontaneous, or does it have to be sort of baked into people's calendars that you actually get to sit down and taste and compare notes and, as you say, keep that rising tide going for all?
Yep. So there's a mix of both. Of course, a lot is spontaneous. You just text your neighbor and say, "Hey, want to do a cellar swap this week? I don't have much to do. It's January." So that happens, and we will taste each other's wines and give feedback. On a more formal scale, since probably I would say 1998 or 1999, it could be off a year or two here or there.
Yeah.
A group of winemakers, Peter Bell, who recently retired from Fox Run, one of my first mentors, and some other, Dave Breeden, who's at Sheldrake Point, is the winemaker, and a handful of others all started this sit-down tasting group that was held at Fox Run and still is. So this is almost 25 years later.
Nice.
And at that time it was, hey, bring tank samples. Let's taste each other's wines blind and give real critical feedback.
Yeah.
Because if we are good at that, if we can do that, we will all make better wines together.
Yeah.
So nowadays and this is post-COVID Zoom world, sometimes twice a month, we have Zoom sessions that are big, broad, open to anyone that wants to come. So we usually do see 20 to 26 different wineries send in samples. Some people don't send samples if they don't have a wine that fits the theme. We just did rye rosé last week, and we all taste over Zoom and give critical feedback. And then once a month, there's a core group of us that pretty much everyone's been attending for at least a decade at this point, that we have a formal tasting group. We pay dues and we buy commercial wines. Tomorrow the theme is going to be, it's split 4 flights, Austrian Gruner and Austrian Dry Riesling. And just kind of see what's happening there. And they're big themes, but they're also themes that do inform what we're doing. And we can tease apart those styles from other regions. What do they say about what we're doing? Do we like the styles? Do we not? What are they doing well? And that's really great, I think, for all of us to, in a room, talk about those wines, tease them apart, and kind of move forward as a group, but also then as a region, because a lot of us are, a lot of the people behind pushing the Finger Lakes forward, which is exciting.
Amazing. And I guess it's a bit of a tactical question, but I'm just curious. But is it possible then to those, as you say, taking the Austrian wines as the example, is it possible to source those in the Finger Lakes, or is that where you maybe gain from your proximity to Manhattan and distribution down there, and maybe from other parts of the States? How do you get your hands on those different examples?
Yep. So we used to be a little more loosey-goosey, and you could get enough from the Rochester area. This year, Peter Bell retired, and Dave Breeden at Sheldrake and myself sort of took over the management of the group. And I said, hey, let's jump on free shipping offers and order wines through some of the bigger stores like Astor Wine and Spirits down in the city, because, they'll have 14 or 15 bottles that fit the theme. And then we'll give some TLC to the shops that we love up in Rochester, like Market View. And we might, get a couple bottles from there to fill out the tasting.
Yeah.
But it often is helpful to be able to order wines from downstate. We have a couple really great stores in the local market, but they don't necessarily have the full spread that we need.
Gotcha. Yeah, it felt as though that would be a point where, actually, because I've flown from Manhattan to Rochester, and I know it's about sort of a 5 or so hour drive.
Yep.
But you may not want to sort of pop down there to pick up some bottles, but as you say, if you've got free statewide shipping, then that can be a great way to, as you say, broaden the palate, broaden the experience, and broaden the tasting. And that I think is still one of the most amazing things about wine, that that you can kind of capture these, I call them moments in time, from all those different parts of the world. And in 99.9% of the cases, they will arrive on your table, no matter where you are in the world, perfectly preserving that nature and that experience. And as you say, putting those into the palates and the glasses of those winemakers must just be fascinating sort of learning experience. And really, really good example, I think, of how things are sort of moving and evolving, but as you say, bringing everybody together. That's super interesting. One thing, Julia, I'd like to sort of transition to now, I think, is really to talk a bit about your place in the Finger Lakes, really. As I think I said before we started recording, I was there back in July 2018, and there in shorts and a t-shirt, and we had a really amazing tasting where we just sat outside and kind of went through a few wines together, which I've just looked up. It's episode 168 on the podcast for anybody that wants to go back and check that out. I highly recommend it. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind just describing, maybe starting with what you're seeing now, like if and when you go out into the vineyard, what is the environment showing you? What does it kind of look like? What does it feel like there? As I say, maybe talking first about this time of the year, and then maybe how does it look in the summer?
Yep. So this time of the year, we're actually on the brink of getting, I don't know, maybe 25 centimeters or more of snow starting in a few hours. So I'm only in for a half day. So it snows a lot here. And that is a key point, snow. We're right near the Great Lakes. People often think just the Finger Lakes. So I'll start with the really big lakes nearby, Ontario and Erie. So they provide a lot of snow protection for us when it gets really cold this time of the year. Because if you have a really cold air mass come over Lake Ontario, it's going to churn up snow. And you've probably heard the news about Buffalo and how much snow they get. All of that's coming off of Lake Ontario. And depending on the wind direction, also can hit us. Okay. And then the center hearts of Cayuga and Seneca also can kick up lake effect weather, typically more snow than rain, but they are also capable, if they're warm enough and the air is cold enough, of kicking up snow. So this time of year, we're in snowland and cloudland too. We get a lot of clouds from sort of those air masses over the large bodies of water. Sort of vineyards are getting tucked in for the winter. We won't prune everything before the winter because our coldest nights are going to hit typically January, early through late January. February can get very, very cold. And the last thing you want to do is prune everything unless you are intentionally leaving a lot of extra canes, or depending on the varietal, a lot extra renewal trunks. You don't want to cut too much back. I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit real fast. Like, you don't want to hit -20 Fahrenheit, which I think is almost -20 Celsius. So
okay, we'll go with bloody cold. And
bloody cold, yes. You don't want that to happen and have pruned everything to what you expect you will need next spring, because you're shooting yourself in the foot. So we're kind of, doing some pre-pruning. Varietals that we know are going to be more cold hardy hybrids. Catawba is a native hybrid that we grow. Those we will prune now. That's fine. And get them buttoned up for the winter. And it's just kind of the waiting game. We do have a wind machine. Several farms do now. So when we do get those really cold nights, we can at least churn up the air, and hot air rises. We're going to pull that down as close as we can to the blocks in our vineyard that have sort of a low spot. So we have one spot in our main Riesling vineyard that has a low spot. About a decade ago, had a lot of damage on some cold nights, and the wind machine went in. Come spring, things start to really get exciting in May around here. So it's fun. I've been in Germany in early May, and I go, oh, cool. This is what we'll look like in 2 weeks. Because they're just ahead of us. And so come May is when things really start to get exciting. We have bud break. We're, pretty much solidly out of any frost dates, and any frosty weather, and the season kicks off. I would say our harvest period in the Finger Lakes compared to some other regions, because we grow hybrids, native hybrids, and Vitis vinifera. We grow all of these different grape varietals. So our harvest period is about 2 months, which is a long stretch of time compared to other regions.
Yeah.
Typically starting around the first or second week of September, and usually the last fruit comes in the first week of November. So it's a stretch of time. And we sort of work through that. The last fruit to come in will be Bordeaux varietals. So around here, you'll find a lot of Cabernet Franc, and then smaller plantings of Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and we have a trio planting of Petit Verdot. And Riesling, obviously, is also going to be one that you pick near the end of harvest.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it would be, really, it's great starting to talk about what happens in the vineyard at those different times of year. But I wonder, something that you mentioned in your questionnaire, which was about your proximity to the lake, really, and the steepness of the drop off. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just saying something about what those soils are composed of, but also maybe something about the kind of bigger geological forces that might have taken place in the past, which have left these fingers, these very distinct, unique characteristics there that gives the region its name.
Yep. Yeah. So the Finger Lakes were formed as glaciers receded. So, right, you have these incredibly deep bodies of water. And then, if you were a bird, everything's very close. But to drive around, they're incredibly huge lakes. They're not as big as the Great Lakes by any means. So they feel small if you are from the Finger Lakes or live here now and know how big the Great Lakes are. But to anybody else, they're huge. And they have their own weather. Not all bodies of water can do that. Glaciers receded, left these very deep, narrow bodies of water. Our soils on our site are similar to what you'll find in the region, but if you look at soil mapping, there are tons of different soil types in the region. Our type is high lime Cazenovia. We have very deep soils. This is pretty typical for most of the west side of Cayuga Lake to have very deep soils. We have a little bit of shale in areas of our vineyard. It's there. It's not, I wouldn't say it's absolutely a defining feature of our growing site. But you definitely know where the soil is a bit more shallow and where there's some more shale in a dry year. You can see it in the vines. We don't get severe drought stress, but you can see it. So we have deep soils, silty loam. We have a lot of water as well. That's another regional characteristic when we sort of look to the west and, they have fires. We don't just have snow and rain falling from the sky. We have a lot of underground water as well, right? We have these deep soils. There is retaining water. It can be our greatest enemy or, the best thing. It's our best thing that we have here. We don't need irrigation. Some vineyards have it, but very few have it. Some newer plantings are putting in irrigation more looking towards what will 20 years from now look like. A lot of water. You also brought up the steep drop off to the lake. We have a lot of these gorges as well that run perpendicular to Cayuga Lake, Seneca Lake. They're amazing for water drainage from your vineyard and air drainage, cold air drainage in the winter. And same with that run to Cayuga Lake. If you're out on the lake, you see this steep cliff. And for the longest time before I worked here, I'd be out in a boat and I'd wonder, what is over there? Yeah. And then I started working at Hosmer and I realized, oh, that's Hosmer's. Like that is, you don't see the vines because, right, you'd have to worry about just soil runoff and So you don't plant right up to that cliff. And we have a bunch of trees there, rooted, old trees. They're holding things down. But as far as water and air drainage go in the winter, or if we have heavy rains, we have really great runoff channels to the gorges that feed to the lake or sort of roll right off of that cliff.
Yeah, fascinating, and I think what you've done there is really taken me back to a conversation I had regarding Washington State, and the Missoula floods, and that they were glacial dams that kept breaking and receding, and it's fascinating because you can talk about lakes and you can talk about glaciers receding, but my feel and my awareness is that those are not always the sort of gentlest of processes to take place. You do get lots of, I guess you'd call it kind of scarification, and you get lots of variability, and you get these sort of, what we would now call in wine, these sort of micro terroirs that are being created, the cliffs, the waterfalls. And I think, it's amazing to hear it spoken about by somebody who's, got their feet in the soil and, has seen those different parts of the lake and the area that you know so well. Mm-hmm. And I think what would, and maybe it's a little bit sort of theoretical, but it might actually be something that you worked on there at Hosmer as well. But is a lot of work done, and is it possible to kind of start to map those blocks and I guess those kind of geological formations into, I think this variety would do well here. I think maybe even, or this clone, or this is the type of grape and the type of product we're going to get from growing in this site. I wonder, what might that bring up to you when you think about anything you've seen at Hosmer or indeed in the region.
Yep. So there's a couple different layers there. So one, Cornell is right in our backyard. So they actually do a lot of soil testing if we just want to like straight up know the numbers. But like I always say with winemaking, the numbers are a part of it, right? Yeah. They're not going to tell you the whole story. Uh-huh. And so other decisions that we look at, rootstock. So it's not just clone. Rootstock also really matters in the vineyard. And then clone as well, and kind of matching those two. So we have a lot of 3309. We grow rootstock in our vineyard that we then sell to Herman J. Weimer that has a nursery, and then they sell grafted vines sort of throughout primarily the East Coast, I believe. I don't know how far they go, but primarily the East Coast. And they have relationships like that with various growers that will grow rootstock and send it over for grafting. So rootstock matters, clone matters, but also your soil, although we have high lime Cazenovia soil through pretty much the entire property, the soil depth varies and the slope varies. And there are patches in the vineyard, if it's a spot that gets cold air in the winter because there's a dip, it also is going to retain water when it rains in the summer and fall. So you kind of get to know those different blocks. The original Riesling planting here on the farm was planted before people were putting in drainage tile. So that also often has more disease pressure, but it's Riesling, and it does typically, I would say 8 out of 10 vintages goes very heavily more towards like really pretty botrytis than true, like, got to get this in immediately pressures. And so you get to know the blocks and sub blocks, different rows. We have the old Riesling planting. I couldn't even tell you what clone it is because it's been replanted so many times. So it's not a single clone. But then we have other Riesling blocks that are clonal and we keep separate when we pick. Same with our Pinot Noir. We have 3 different clones. We keep them separate, ferment them separately. Cabernet Franc generally, the stuff from the 90s, we don't know exactly what the clone is, but we don't have too much clonal variation. Same with Chardonnay, not too much clonal variation, but we do use different, and this is a Tim and Cameron Hosmer thing, we do use different trellising systems. So the Chardonnay is on high wire umbrella is what we call it. It's a high cordon trellising system. It's typically used for sort of hybrid grapes or native hybrid grapes, but growers that started in that area started to realize they can grow high quality Chardonnay using the same training system. It doesn't work particularly well for any other vinifera thus far. Chardonnay seems to be the only one that's happy with it. But we also have another block of Chardonnay that we train differently because of where it's at in the vineyard, and it doesn't want that training system. So yeah.
Yeah, no, super interesting, and that was certainly one of the things that stood out for me when I was in the Finger Lakes, when I was touring, and learning about all of those different approaches that felt as though people were very much in tune with what the different areas needed, and were I think well aware, if you like, of all of the different colors that were in the toolbox, if you like, to be able to make those grapes and to help those grapes to grow. And I think maybe what I might ask you to touch on is I guess the part of the story that's maybe not always as visible, and I certainly didn't see as much of, which are those decisions that are then made in the cellar. Is there, would you say, a sort of a house style or a philosophy that essentially guides you when you're faced with all those decisions that you've had to make earlier this year?
Yep. Yeah. So the cellar, all those decisions start prior to even picking the fruit. So I start sampling most varietals probably 3 weeks or so, really sampling, running numbers, tasting the fruit before they're going to come in. And once the block of fruit tastes, flavor profile wise, tastes how I want it to taste, and I'm seeing good chemistries, we'll pull it in. And depending on the vintage, I will handle it in different ways. Some years I'm pretty aggressive with cold soaking with a lot of our whites. If it's a year with a little more disease pressure, I'll be a little more choosy about who gets to be cold soaked and who doesn't. It might go straight to press. And then getting into sort of fermentation in the cellar, we pretty much use commercial yeasts. I'll trial some native ferments. One, sort of to my cellar being a very old school Finger Lake cellar, by mid-November it gets really, really cold, and Riesling comes in pretty late for us. So I do lean a little more heavily on commercial yeast for things like Riesling, because I need to know that the ferments are going to kick off and actually finish. Because it can be a challenge for me to keep my cellar above like 8 Celsius. And eight's cool. Especially for a ferment that's just trying to get going. So not, super sexy, I guess, that I use commercial yeast, but I never use the amount they say. I always use way less. And that sort of forces slower fermentations. I like low temperatures, slower. I like the textural components that come out of that. I always feel a little guilty if my ferment finishes in 4 weeks. I'm like, wait, it's already done? So I don't try and rush things through. If I'm getting off notes, I will certainly intervene. I'm not going to say, like, some people are like, oh, I'm a non-interventionist. No. Like, I view them as small wine children. They need a little bit of guidance to be something nice and pretty. You don't need to give them all the guidance. That can be a little too much, but I like to kind of angle them to do what I would like them to do, but also try and give them room to sort out the quirks as they pop up.
Okay, I love it. Yeah, it's I feel like we've gotten such an interesting angle on you, on the region, on what you're growing there, and again, I could kind of talk to you all day. There's so many things that I've been sort of holding myself back from asking as we really kind of near the end of the interview today. But one thing I like to do, just to kind of leave the listener at least in the UK with an idea of kind of where they can find some of your wines and what might be sort of over here. So I know you mentioned that you've sent a couple of shipments with vineyard cellars since July 21. And maybe just give us a flavor of what we might find over here, and what that's looking like at the moment.
Yeah. So I went over to visit in May, and the wines that seem to do really well in the market are dry Riesling, and our Cabernet Franc and our Pinot Noir. I should know off the top of my head where you can find them. I don't, but vineyard sellers could tell you, or they certainly would have obviously an up-to-date list. And I know they have a couple restaurants that they'll have the wines in. But Cabernet Franc, Pinot, dry Riesling, and our ice wine, actually. Our Riesling ice wine has been a hit, too.
Amazing. And also just a sense maybe of the kind of quantities that are finding their way over here versus your total production.
Yeah, so our total production is about 120,000 bottles, and we have a wide range of wines that we're making. So Finger Lakes context, we're a medium-sized winery. We're not a huge winery, but we're also not considered small. Medium-sized. In the UK, our first 2 shipments each were about 1,200 bottles, a little more.
Okay.
So small, but it's also a good starting point. So it's a great relationship to have.
Okay, amazing, fantastic. So, if you're lucky enough to come across the Hosmer Wines, then make sure you pick up a bottle. Finally, just to please share with people, what's the best place to find you online, be that website, be that social media.
Yep. So hosmerwinery.com is our website, and we are relatively active on Instagram. So that's probably the other great spot to find us, or Facebook. Just type in Hosmer Winery.
Once again, a huge thank you to Julia Hoyle of Hosmer Estate Winery. An absolute pleasure to speak again and revisit your part of the Finger Lakes. Please do help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/477. And you can find the links to all episodes from the series in the description below. Next time on Interpreting Wine New York Winemaker Special Series, in episode 478, I'll be speaking with Bruce Murray of Boundary Breaks. So make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine podcast to be alerted when the episode goes live. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.